Well, let's talk about layers. And the layers are extremely powerful. There's something you really just want to get used to using. I've got my layers palette open here. Layers are something I always have open, and you should too. Just make friends with this palette and keep it around always. So what layers let you do, they let you keep your file editable essentially. Now I have this sword, and I'm gonna hit auto select up here, and I can move it around, and I can even grab its selection if I need to, but I couldn't do that if the file was flattened, as they say. Now if I were to go and just flatten this thing down to just one layer, and I can do that over here, just flatten image, then I don't have that selection anymore. You know, I can't just grab that sword. I can't move it around. See, that layer's locked. It's a background layer now. But even if it wasn't, you know, all I've got is that whole thing. I don't have the outline of the sword anymore. So I'm going to back up. Alright, I got my layer back. Now, I think what I did before was I changed my keyboard shortcuts, so I got to get those back to my JG shortcuts. Alright, so I got my layer back, and now I can just move that sword around at will. I can grab its outline. Now if I wanted to, something I can do from the layers palette, I can add a drop shadow to it. And you know, if I wasn't on a layer, or I didn't have this thing knocked out on its own layer, I would have a big square around it, or I wouldn't be able to do it at all. So linear burn, you know, that's one thing I can do with layers there. Now I can also make new layers, and I can move those around. So then I haven't really destroyed anything. I can always go back. If I can turn that layer off by hitting this icon. I don't see it anymore. So, and let's say I even want another one. Now, this is the cool thing about these layers is that I don't have to really wreck anything. Even if I thought, oh, I'm going to change something on this one, and I can turn off these other layers and just affect this one layer without really dealing with anything else. Let's turn those back on. The cool thing too is that these layers will let you you can put them together into a set. I can group them, and now I can turn that whole group off at once if I wanted to. You know, I can still affect them one at a time, but this whole group can be moved around as long as I have the group folder selected. Oops, I have auto select on. That will change that, but so I can move them all around at once. Actually, if I turn on auto select and change it to group, then it will always choose my group too. Just a little extra tip in there. Now, other things I can do with my layers, if I needed to, if I didn't want to group them, I could link them. I could select them all holding the shift key. I could select one, shift key, and select all of those, and then I could press link down here at the bottom, and they're all, oh, I need my group there. These are all linked. Alright, now there's just a whole bunch of other stuff I can be doing with the layers palette. Now I can add a layer mask. Let's add a layer mask to this middle one here. That's down here at the bottom. This circle icon here, circle inside of a square. Alright, this is a layer mask. This is a reveal all layer mask. It's white, which means everything is showing, which means nothing has changed really. So I'm going to paint on this with black. And I pressed the B key, and I got my brush tool. And now I'm going to press my bracket key and increase my brush size. So if I paint on this white icon with black, I'm going to hide what's on the layer. So as you can see, going through there, it's hiding it, but it's not destroying it. It's not destroying it. So if I were to switch my color, and now I've got white, I'm going to be painting that all back in. Very cool stuff. And you can also do, I'm going to fill that whole thing with white. Oh yeah, make sure that you're actually on the layer mask. Sometimes you're on the layer itself, and I'll start painting with black like, oh crap. Now you got to make sure that your layer mask itself is selected, which it should be at the moment you create it, but as you start moving around you'll forget. I can also do a gradient here, and you'll see this effect a lot of times that you know, black is going to hide, white reveals. So as you can see, a gradient with different levels of black and white, it's going to fade. And you can really play around with that, or you can play around with your brush and you can change the opacity, you know, and just, oops, I should paint with black. Yeah, and fade it. And of course, you know, the more black is on there, then it's going to hide it more. And with white, I can paint it back in. So that's something that's really powerful. I'm not destroying anything. I still have that sword there if I need it. I could take the layer mask and apply it to the entire group. So now that group has a layer mask, and I'm going to put my opacity back to 100. And yeah, so now I can affect the entire group with the layer mask. Okay, but I'm going to fill that with white. That's back. Or I can, if I want to get rid of it, I can drag it down here to the trash. Delete layer mask. Yeah, I don't need it anymore. Get rid of that. Okay. Other things I can do. So let's, again, I'm going to move this one to the top. So let's deal with this sword here. So if I want to do an adjustment layer, that means I want to, down here at the bottom, I'm going to adjust some of the properties here. Let's say I want to adjust the saturation. Well, I can choose that. I'll get a window here and I can pump up the saturation. But look what's happening though. Everything is getting saturated, which is not what I want. So I'm going to just start over on that. I'll get rid of the whole thing. Alright, but what I'm going to do is command click. Now I've got just this sword. I've got it selected. It's all by itself. And I'm going to go and I'm going to do that again. Hue saturation. Now, in conjunction with the adjustment layer, it has a layer mask like we just saw. So now when I do a saturation, it's only going to affect that one. And nothing else is getting affected, only this. And the great thing too, if I don't like it, you know, I'll turn it off or I can delete it. I haven't really done anything irrevocable here, but that's the power of layers, is I can do this without having to worry about not being able to go back. So other things you can do here is the blending modes. So let's turn off this hue saturation. So here I've got my blending mode. It's at normal, which is how most people are going to work, I guess. But if you just want to feel like going through and playing with these are really based on photographic equivalents, like, you know, dodging and burning and such. So up here, these are going to darken, these are going to lighten. Some of these do both, like overlay kind of does both. Let's just see what overlay looks like. So, okay, that may not be something you want, but I think it makes the darks darker and the brights brighter using overlay. So if I do linear burn, that's going to just go ahead and actually multiplies, like it combines it with the layer underneath, and it you know, it makes it darker. I usually do linear burn because it's a little bit richer, as you can see. So I prefer to use linear burn. And if I wanted to make it lighter, I could go to, you know, color dodge, linear dodge. And the thing too is that changing the opacity, I can change opacity. I can also, if I had this effect here, I can just change the fill, the opacity of the fill, and that's going to leave my drop shadow there. So as you can see, drop shadow is still fine, but the layer itself is gone. It's just the shadow, and that's a very cool tip that you can do with these layers. I'm going to change that back to normal. If I needed to, I could combine these layers. I can take them and I can Command E, which will force those all into one. Sometimes sometimes as you're working, you may be running out of space, you may be running out of RAM, and you want to reduce the size of these files, and layers are going to add a lot to your file. So you may want to, as time goes on, you know, in stages, just go ahead and okay, these two are fine as they are. I'm going to go ahead and combine those. One thing you probably notice is that those filter effects down here in the FX area here, some of these filter effects, you got to be careful with those, because when the layers combine, like if I save a JPEG and the layers combine, because JPEGs don't save layers, they always flatten, so your effect may not look the same. You got to take that into account when you're working with these layers sometimes, and filters and such, and even the blending modes, sometimes they don't come out the same when you flatten it, so you got to be prepared for that. And sometimes flattening in stages does help, but other times you may just have to double up on an effect. So I might have to just Command J, duplicate this layer, and you know, I'll save a much heavier shadow than the other ones, because I had 2 layers there. So I think that's kind of a crash course on these layers. Just let me know if you have any questions. There's so much that can be done with these, but they are a staple. You got to be using them, and it really pays off. And you'll thank yourself later when you open up one of your Photoshop files and, oh, thank God, I still have that layered file. It happens all the time, especially from my days in pre-press. Anyway, just let me know if you have any more questions, and that's a few tips there on layers. Okay, now we're talking about actions. And actions are like mini programs to automate some of the features of Photoshop that are going to help you be more efficient. And it's very nice to make these actions and run them on a bunch of files, and run them on a bunch of a series of files, and just watch the work happen while you're just sitting back. And if you're not using them, if you're doing a lot of Photoshop, do yourself a favor, learn about actions, and you will put a little work in up front to set up the action just the way you want, but after that, you won't be doing any more work on it. I mean, depending on what you have to do, sometimes you might have to do more scripting. I don't really do that. I don't really end up having to do that, but I know that you know, some people end up making their own actions or doing some other kind of script or something. But for most things, you can use the actions. And I'll show you a very minor thing that seems minor that I ended up making an action for, was to create a new layer. Now, obviously I can just go down here to the layer and I can press my new layer button, and I'm going to get a new layer here, which is fine, but I get tired of going there every time and clicking that button. So instead I changed it to an action, and I signed the F9 key, so I'm just pressing that now and getting my new layers. So I know it's probably like, why didn't he just use a keyboard shortcut instead of going through the trouble of making an action? Well, I'll show you. When I go to keyboard shortcuts and I go to my panel menus, so then I'm going to go to my layers. Alright, here's the very top option, new layer, and there's an ellipse there. So dot 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 is telling you there's more options. There's a pop-up window you're going to have to deal with once you select new layer, and keyboard shortcut doesn't help me overcome that. You know, I can assign anything I want here, but when I press that keyboard shortcut and I go to new layer, I'm going to get this every time, and then I'm going to have to come over here and click OK, you know, which is fine, but again, can't this be easier? So if I go to my actions, and as you can see, I have new layer here, and it's F9. But I'll show you how I make that. So as you can see, I have a bunch of sets here. Some of these are default that are just in-air video action textures, and others are ones that I made. So if I want to make a new action, down here at the bottom of the actions palette, and if your palette isn't available, go under window, go to actions, and it should pop up. But I go down here, press the new action, and I'm going to call it new layer 2. So I'll record, and once I hit record, you can see this turns red. Everything I do from now on is going to be recorded. So all I need to do is press the new layer button. I go back to my actions. You can see it made the layer. It recorded me making layer, and I press stop. So now it's done. Except now I'd have to come back here and press play every time I wanted to make a new layer, which you can see it did, which I don't want to do that. So I can either double click this and get my action options, or I can go off the side here and go to action options, and I can assign a key to it. And what's very cool about this is that if I go through here and something is, you know, if it's being used, it'll automatically add this shift onto it. This is being used, F9 is being used by my first action, so shift is added there. F8 is being used by something, you know, you can tell it's being used by something. So it's trying to prevent me from conflicting. And one thing that will happen too is that these actions, when you assign a function key to an action, it will override your keyboard shortcut. So you got to be aware of that when you do that. Now, I think what I'll do, you know, I can assign that to, I'll just say 11. Alright, so now I've also got F11 that is making new layers for me. It's really as simple as that. Another thing you can do with these actions, if you want to keep track of these things, you want to make sure they move in case you upgrade or in case you crash and you want to get them back, you make a bunch of actions, then you can go off to the side here and you can say save actions, or actually you have to save your set. So I'd have to select my set, click there, save actions, and it's going to save them, and normally it sends it to the default place where they should be, but you can have them anywhere, and then you can just come off the side and you can say load actions. But it really helps when you move to a different machine, or you upgrade your program and you got to move those actions and load those actions in. Especially if you spent a year or two making them and you've come to rely on them, you don't want to be without them. So that's a basic crash course on these actions. And the best thing about actions too is that you can then go to your automate, under file automate, go to batch, and it's going to use these actions. You know, I can pick my JG actions, I can pick anything I got in here, and I can then say okay, work on open files, and I can say save to whatever folder I decide to pick, desktop, and then it's going to run that action. And if I say override action save as, that means it's not going to use what I do here. It's going to use what's in the action. So you'd actually have to have a save command in the action. It's kind of confusing at first. It's kind of confusing, but once you learn it, it's really powerful. It really saves you a ton of time. If you have any questions, just let me know. Aside from that, if you're not using them, get busy on those actions. Just play around, make something fun, make something, you know, that can help you. If you found yourself doing the same thing over and over, it might be time for an action. So aside from that, that's pretty much the tip for that.